All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. I think hopefully you can all see me. So I'd like to kick off with, you should see the chat on your right for everyone to type in, where are they watching this from? What city, what country, whatever it is, type it in the chat to see, to see kind of where around the world everyone's kind of speaking from. And in the meantime, I'm going to put up a poll to see what are the challenges that everyone's facing. Start poll. We're just figuring this out. So here we go. Add to stream. Perfect. Cool. So we've got Tatiana from London, Denisa from Glasgow, Rishab from India. Awesome. So I'd like to kick off with a poll because we're going to be covering a lot of these topics in our webinar today. The question is, what's the biggest content marketing challenge you're facing right now? So number one, proving commercial impact. I think this is a big one. Getting experts to contribute in helping create the content, standing out in a saturated market, quality versus volume trade-offs. Should you create a lot of content or not? Visibility on AI and LLMs and whether to grow that. So pick what's your biggest challenge right now, and we'll hopefully be able to address it in the webinar. We've got a few more people. Patrick from Montreal, awesome. Katie is in Edinburgh. Amazing. So while the poll continues, I'll introduce ourselves a bit and then talk a bit about what we're going to talk about today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Araminta, and I'm the founder and director at Mint Studios. We're a content marketing agency in the fintech and financial services space. And what we specialize in is turning content into measurable impact. And what I'm really excited about to cover in this webinar is this report that I'm going to talk a bit more about later on, that over the past 2 years, I've been interviewing marketing leaders at fintech companies all around the world, some of the top fintech companies that everyone knows, to understand a bit how they think about content, how they do content. So it seems right now that number one on the poll is proving commercial impact. That's interesting. I was in between standing out in saturated market and that one, so it's cool to see that is the first one. And the good thing is that we're going to be covering a lot of that in this webinar. So yeah, very cool, very interesting. Also, I was going to mention that we, as part of this report, as part of this webinar, we have also put together kind of like a short PDF that breaks down what this all means in the age of AI, because I think that ultimately there's a lot of noise out there, but understanding what this means for now can be kind of difficult to understand. So if you would like that PDF, please type AI into the chat, and this will all be recorded, and we will send the PDF later on this week or maybe next week. So type AI into the chat and we'll send that PDF over. I also wanted to mention that we're planning on doing more of these webinars where we're going to break down topics like LLM visibility, commercial impact tracking, HubSpot, all these kind of things. So if you would like to join future webinars, please join our email list. I'll put the link here and you'll get notified every time we do that. Right, okay, let's get started. So also, by the way, this is all recorded. Everyone will get the recording afterwards, along with key takeaways. Also, please feel free to put questions, comments in the chat, and we will address them throughout the webinar, because I do find that answering questions in the moment is a little bit easier than later on. So please feel free to put questions in the chat. So I'm going to cross this poll out and then share my screen. All right, I think everyone can see my screen. Add to stream. Okay, perfect. That should be now public. Right, okay. So what am I going to talk about today? Let me see, does this... I don't know which one looks better. I'm going to leave it like this. Right, so I'll start off with kind of going through some of the key takeaways in the report. The report is really long, so I wouldn't blame you if you haven't read the whole thing. So I thought it'd be cool to go through kind of the main takeaways. I'm also quite proud of the report in the sense that this is not generic kind of advice like, oh, write quality content, that kind of stuff. This report is really based on real interviews with 10 marketing leaders at 10 really great companies. So there's some really good stuff in there, and I wanted to go through some of those key takeaways. After that, we've got a panel with really amazing speakers, 3 who I interviewed as part of the report and who are going to later join us for this panel. And if there's time at the end, we'll do Q&A. But as I've said, also feel free to put questions in the chat and all of that. All right. So why did we create this report? So I started this process about 2 years ago, and I created it because when I was looking for benchmark data, when I was looking for information about how to do content marketing or just marketing in general for fintechs, there just wasn't much information out there. Most of it was for software, for SaaS. And one of my pet peeves is a lot of people using advice for SaaS for then fintech, because they are 2 different industries, really. Opening a social media scheduling tool account is not the same as picking a card issuing provider or an AML transaction tool or a payment orchestration company. The sales cycles are a lot longer, often multi-year processes. There's multiple buyers, sometimes buyers who are not even employed by the company, like external consultants. And then, of course, there's compliance, right? And with compliance, that means that the content you're creating, you have to be more mindful about what you're saying. Maybe there's certain things that you can't create, all these kind of things. So at the time, 2 years ago, I was like, there's a gap here. There isn't content for this specific audience. Why don't we create it? And I thought the best way to do that was to go around interviewing marketing leaders at companies like Pleo, Adyen, Truly, ComplyAdvantage, and many more to try and understand, okay, so what is the standard? What is the benchmark here? So that's what I did here, interviewed 10 of the world's top fintech companies. And the result is over 100 pages of case studies, more than 18 key learnings from this process. And as I said earlier, what I'm really proud of is that there's insights, there's examples in this report that you won't find anywhere else, right? And that's what I'm going to go through some of those today. So let's go through some of those main takeaways. So the first one that I heard from definitely every single expert that I talked to was the experts. Experts were baked in to the process of content creation. And this might seem obvious to some people, but you'd be surprised at how often we start working with a new company and the experts don't have time, they want nothing to do with marketing, they're too busy, and you kind of have to fight to get an interview. What I was seeing with a lot of the companies I interviewed, they understood that experts have to be part of this process. For Unit, for example, they're an embedded banking company. Every single piece they created had 2 subject matter experts by default, one from product or engineering and one from sales and success. In 11FS, they also had this process of involving the experts. So what they would do is the expert would do kind of most of the writing or most of the content creation, and then there'd be a ghostwriter or a marketer who edits it for tone. At Enfuce, they would skip that altogether, and it was the actual expert that was the face of the content. So, for example, they had Mikis, who was a payment solution expert, and he had his own Mikis Minute kind of YouTube series that was 60-second product explainers. They also had their own podcast, and the co-CEO at the time was the host of the In the Hot Seat podcast. So all the companies I talked to, they understood that experts have to be part of the content creation process. The second takeaway was tracking. Now, tracking is a key part of proving commercial impact and all of that, and we're going to talk about that more in a second. But a key reason that these companies are tracking is to get a better understanding of the customer. And my favorite kind of stat to show this is with Pleo. So Alejandro, the head of content at the time, he told me that they were switching to HubSpot to get better at tracking, basically, and to be able to see better how people are interacting with their content. And they got a few really interesting specific insights. First of all, they discovered that if a prospect read a certain number of pages, they were more likely to convert and submit a lead form. They also found out that if the point of contact read more than 3 pieces, they closed a lot more quickly. Now, that's really interesting information. And what does that mean? What are some things that you can do if you know this? Well, for example, if number 3 is the inflection point, maybe you don't want to be gating content at number 1 or number 2, right? Or if you know that someone has only read 1 or 2 pieces, the goal is to get them to read more, not to submit a demo, right? It can also change a little bit how you retarget. Maybe if you're targeting people who have never visited your website before, the goal is to get them to read content rather than to, submit a lead form or whatever. But in general, what I was seeing is that everyone was very keen on tracking and one of the key use cases is to really better understand your customer. The next takeaway is the one that we kind of talked about earlier, which is commercial success of content is crucial. They understood, every single company I talked to was like, yep, we're tracking content back to revenue, right? We are trying to track how content is influencing revenue. And I know that, they all did track metrics like these marketing metrics, page views and time on page. These are still relevant and good to track. But what's important to mention is that these companies also tracked revenue pipeline leads from content. They understood the importance of doing this. For example, ComplyAdvantage who we'll hear from later, he was able to share that they were able to bring in over 1 million in closed won deals through the newsletter alone. And like when you've got a stat like that, and when you're able to show that to leadership, it just makes your life so much easier when you're trying to ask for more budget or whatever it is. Nuvei also had this approach where they would assign a specific attribution percentage to every channel and content type, so they could see like how each type of content, each channel would influence a closed won deal. The next one also is probably one of my favorites, which is the companies I talked to, they all understood the importance of a story and how that often is more important than a dashboard. The problem with a dashboard is that you've got a lot of numbers, you've got a lot of metrics that maybe a CFO, a CEO might not understand, doesn't think it's relevant, it doesn't make sense to them, right? What you want to be able to do is to tell a story and show to leadership how a prospect visits different pages, how you have to meet them in person, and then they download a white paper, and then months go by, and then they submit a lead form. And in my conversation with Will from ComplyAdvantage, he was able to share how they use dream data to really show how a user takes that kind of journey before becoming a lead. And they also had this combined with like Slack notifications, which was really cool because then every time there was a demo form, they would get a Slack notification that would show like the different pieces of content that person read. And again, when you've got that coming into your Slack every week as a leader, you're not even questioning whether content is worth it. You're seeing it right there. So being able to tell a story is a really big part of, being able to do content marketing well, really. The next one is the content team understands the importance of being close to the customer. And again, this might seem obvious to some people, but you'd be surprised at how many content teams and marketing teams I've met who don't think this is a priority or are not sure how to do it, or honestly don't know what are the key pain points of their target audience. But many of the teams that I talked to, it was part of their rituals, part of their weekly schedules to be in touch with the customer. So Unit, for example, they every week would meet for what they call Gong Call Story Time. Gong is a sales recording tool. It records sales calls. And so every week they would listen to those sales calls for 45 to 60 minutes. And then afterwards they would do a debrief. Who was the persona? What questions are they asking? How are they measuring success? Where are they getting stuck? All that good stuff. But if your marketing team is a lot bigger, how can you do that at scale? So this is where Adyen took a different approach. Their approach was the UX team gathers hours of customer interviews and makes them accessible to anyone on the marketing team. And that way, as a marketer, you could go in, listen to customer interviews, which is a nice way to do that at scale. Galileo had a more modern version of this, where they would use AI tools to analyze those Gong sales calls. And then that AI tool would pull real language objections, and then that would filter into their content strategy and content ideas. So again, a lot of these companies have rituals, have processes to ensure that they're constantly in touch with their target audience and their pain points and what their audience really cares about. And for the final takeaway, I heard this time and time again as well with the teams that I was talking to, is the need for technical content. 5-10 years ago, a lot of content marketing was create high level, kind of top of the funnel content. What is compliance? What is PEP? What is XYZ? And perhaps, 10 years ago it worked, right? The thinking was rank for as many keywords as possible, and then eventually prospects might read a few and trickle in. But this no longer works mainly because of AI overviews. Now, if you look up what is PEP screening, AI overviews will answer that question directly, your user will never click on the page and then read. So you're losing a lot of that traffic. And the companies I was talking to, they understood this. They also understood that content is the first touch point that a prospect will have with your brand, right? And if you're targeting a compliance manager, a payments manager, someone who's an expert in their field, and the first piece of content they read is, what is PEP screening? They're going to think, okay, does this product know their audience? Like, clearly I know what that is already. So these companies, a lot of the companies I was talking to were redoing their strategy to create more technical, more advanced content. So for example, Truly You, when I interviewed Dawn, she was explaining how they were moving away from this, like, what is PEP screening? And they were creating more technical content. And when I say technical, I mean just more useful, more like in line with what the prospect wants. For example, they would change to, how do elections impact PEP data? Or how does this specific election impact PEP data? So the content was more useful, more technical in the sense that it's more for the right audience. 11FS also were doing this by coining phrases that only their audience would understand, like digital banking is 1% finished, or jobs to be done. So they were moving away from like 101 explainers to more technical insider language phrases. And then Volt also do this. When I say technical, doesn't necessarily mean jargony, right? It can also be, you can also write in a way that's conversational, easy to understand, but you're covering a topic in a way that only your target audience would be interested in. And they're an open banking company, and they did like a really in-depth piece of content about open banking that went viral and brought in a lot of customers. And so, this is a really good example of creating the right kind of content for the right audience. So anyway, these are the main takeaways. There's many more in the report, which you can check out. And as I said, like, it's just been really great to get so many insights from so many different people, and also analyze and compare how each company does things differently. So we're going to get started with the panel, but I just wanted to check. Okay, perfect. I'm going to put everyone here live. Let me remove the... Okay, here we go. Hey, Laura.
Hi.
Hi, Scott. I will. I'm actually going to keep this up just for a second. So we've got our fantastic panel here, and I'll introduce them before we get started with our panel. So first of all, we've got Will from ComplyAdvantage, although now works at Multiverse. Will helped lead ComplyAdvantage's shift to a strategy that was more like quality over quantity approach, which I'm excited to dig into. And actually, Will, I believe this photo was taken at Money 2020 where you broke down that approach, right? And I think I took that photo, is that right?
You took that photo, yeah, all credit to you.
Amazing. We've then got Laura, director of, and I'll explain briefly what ComplyAdvantage does, just for those who don't know. ComplyAdvantage are an end-to-end platform, and they do AML, onboarding, monitoring, transaction monitoring, all these kind of things. We've then got Laura, Director of Media and Marketing at 11FS. 11FS are a consultancy in the fintech space. If you work in fintech and live in the UK, you've definitely heard of them. And she helped build 11FS's media engine, helping the podcast reach over 22 million downloads. I'm sure this is a lot higher now because this was 2 years ago that you gave me this number. And she's helped build a defining media brand in fintech with 11FS. And then we've got Scott Henderson, Director of Digital Marketing at Galileo. Galileo is North America's largest payments processor, has been around, as Scott was saying earlier, 25 years, and was acquired in 2020 by SoFi. And they do card issuing, digital banking APIs, core banking infrastructure. And Scott helped pioneer LLM content tracking at Galileo, and also help build a really sales-aligned content machine at Galileo, which I'm also excited to get into. So I'll kick off with a question for all of you, because we've talked a lot about content. There's a lot of advice out there, as I said, for software. I'd love to hear, what's a piece of conventional content marketing advice that you think today is just wrong? It's just wrong nowadays. And I'll start off with you, Will.
I've heard quite a lot. Actually, I did a panel a few weeks ago where someone said, "Oh, white papers are dead. It's such an old-fashioned format. You know, why are we still writing them?" I think this kind of, so I would quite challenge that. I think people get lost in format over function and goal and audience, and it sounds very obvious, but we still do it. And I think it's very easy. And we certainly did at points at Comply, got a bit swept up in saying, this form, it's all digital, it's all got to be interactive. Actually, we found that depending on what we were saying, right, but comply is in a very regulated industry. If we were talking about really complex geopolitical issues, regulatory challenges, how those things intersect, our clients wanted an in-depth piece of like solid written content they could have on their desktop, they could refer back to, and that the length and depth of it was what gave it credibility. Very different to what I created at Multiverse in a very different industry, but for complying for that audience, actually a 100-page PDF was actually the right call, and that's what people wanted. But I think there's this conventional wisdom, and maybe it's marketers trying to be a bit creative and a bit provocative. But I hear quite a lot of, this format's dead or that format's dead. It's not the format, right? It's what you do with it. It's your audience. It's how you structure and set it up. So that's my myth buster.
No, I love it. White papers still work. Yeah, that's great. How about you, Laura?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. I think for me, I think on the kind of the regularity of posting content, particularly on social, like there was a sort of a conventional wisdom that, you need to post X number of times a week to stay relevant, etc. While I think cadence is important, and we may talk about that in a little while, not to sound the AI alarm too early, but I think in a world where, people are just churning this stuff out and sort of you're competing with sort of AI slop, as it were. I think just posting to hit a goal of number of posts per week is no longer fit for purpose. I think kind of sort of related to Will's point, it's only worth posting, it's only worth saying something if you have something worth saying that's actually going to add value to your audience, and in which case you should absolutely do it. But if you don't, there's no point forcing it just to hit a kind of quota of amount of posts per week, per month, etc.
Yes, that's we're going to talk about content cadence in a second, because that's a really good topic. How about you, Scott? What do you think?
Yeah, one of the things we've heard for a long time as marketers is, the best content will rise to the top. And I don't think that that's necessarily true now and going forward, where you might spend the next 365 days putting out a great piece of content, leveraging AI every day, and expecting it or hoping that it just kind of rises to the top because you're producing a lot of content isn't true. I think we need to look at like, how are we getting it in front of our audience? Are we including it in emails being sent out? Are we sharing it on social media? Like, what is our promotion strategy? I think is more important now than ever, because like Laura said, the AI slop, there's a lot of content that's out there, and yours might actually be really good, especially compared to what you wrote 10 years ago. But I don't think that that's quite enough in our day to day.
Yeah, this is a big topic I actually want to touch on as well later. So yeah, let's talk about content cadence, because I think I do remember maybe 5 years ago, I feel like the advice was just create a lot. You've got Gary Vaynerchuk who was like, do your content and then film yourself doing the content, and then that's your content, and just do a lot, put yourself out there. But I liked my interview with you, Will, like about a year ago, I guess, when you were at Comply, about how you found that doing less actually improved registrations, closed won deals, it improved everything. So let's talk about content cadence. Like, is it better to do a lot or a little? What have you found is like the right balance? And yeah, I guess we could start with you, Will. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at Comply, we found that, right? I think the example that we talked about in the white paper is we run a summer series of kind of webinar content every summer, a set of educational pieces. We used to do 6 or 7. It was a huge amount of work for the team. We had a huge amount of guest speakers. Actually, we cut it down to 4 the next year, and it was one of the 4 that was the lowest attended in terms of number, but it was on an ISO, a really niche kind of ISO standard that's really important to compliance officers. It got about 200 signups. The rest were at kind of 1,000 plus. But actually, when we looked at the data, dream data, looking at, well, what was the pipeline impact of that webinar, the quality in terms of the people that had turned up was much, much higher than some of the other webinars. Even though if you just looked at the kind of top line sort of vanity numbers around how many people had turned up, again, it obviously depends what your goals are, but actually it wouldn't have been seen as the most effective. So obviously it does go back to what your goals are, but I think we definitely found that. And I will say, I think since that conversation in the last year with the focus on AI content and, how do we optimize for AI search, I've been to a few sessions where companies have done demos of how they're tackling kind of AI-led content, and they've built, agents that help them scan for the keywords, and then they built agents that build these kind of skeleton pages for their website to hit those keywords, and they're just churning it out. And they will say in these sessions, I've heard people say it, hopefully they're not on the webinar, but I've heard people say, yeah, this won't last forever, because when everyone starts doing this, there'll be so much content it gets crowded, and I'll have to start doing, quality and authority ranking and all this stuff.
Wow.
But we're doing great. Look at our numbers, and I just bash my head on the table and think we're doing what we all used to do on SEO, which is, it ruins it. It's a terrible experience. You're not solving for customers. So I think it's still something that goes on, right? And AI just makes that risk of just being able to automate volume, not quality, even higher.
So you're in the camp of less, I imagine, right?
So long as
Less
it
but good
ties to your
quality.
business goals, yes, yeah, for sure. But
Yeah,
less,
that's
less
true.
more, it's not actually about less, it's about more intentional. You could do a lot,
Yeah.
and as long as it's very intentional about what you're doing with it, but that probably naturally leads you to doing less.
Yeah, no, I agree. How about you, Scott? What do you think?
No, I agree. I think you can do more if it's more intentional and more useful for your audience leveraging AI. So I would say I'm on the camp of do more better.
Okay.
Because we can. I think there are so many
If you can.
tools and resources and things that we can do as marketers to help us understand what are our buyers looking for. Leveraging some of the AI tools to help us speed up good, high quality content. And so I'm not necessarily of the opinion that we should be doing less, even though it's, we could be focusing on higher quality. I think we can do both.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. We'll dive into the specifics of that when we talk about AI a bit. How about you, Laura? Which camp are you in?
I completely agree with the point around, it's about the intention rather than just doing for the sake of doing. I think to my earlier point, like if you're just doing that, then there's no goal to it apart from to do it, and that isn't the reason to do content. You need to do content with a goal that either aligns to a revenue target or brand building or whatever it may be. Just doing it for the sake of doing it is achieves nothing. However, obviously, looking after a podcast that has over 1,000 episodes would naturally put me in the do more camp. But again, that is sort of, again, it's about knowing your audience and what resonates most with them. If you set up something like a media property, particularly something like a podcast, where listener habits are formed early and they're quite rigorous. If you imagine your own listening habits, you probably know what day of the week your favorite podcast comes out. So you kind of build an audience habit around the content that you're creating. And I think that's certainly true for media content. For marketing content, I think, scarcity can definitely play dividends. I think especially for as Will was talking about, that kind of longer, more technical, more detailed, more sort of how-to content. Like we've definitely seen good results from doing sort of half yearly or quarterly deep dives and reports and that sort of thing, where you're kind of really putting your expertise in one place and really digging down into one particular topic, but then sort of topping that up with slightly less detailed content in the meantime. But again, it is all about, what does our audience expect from us? Are we giving them what they are looking for from our brand? And are they getting value from that? And we've done plenty of things before where we've actually just stopped doing them because we're like, the audience isn't getting any value from that. The numbers aren't great, so we're going to stop doing it. So I think there's a lot of you can train your audience, but you also have to train yourself based on your audience's responses as well, and not be afraid to fail or to pull back on your cadence or your format or whatever it is. So I don't think it's necessarily do less or do more. I think it's experiment and learn from your audience and what delivers the most value for your brand.
Yeah. So and this will lead on to kind of our AI topic, which is, I guess we all want quality. No one's really going to say, oh, no, we don't want quality. But I guess the question is then, can you use AI in a way that creates more content in a way that's quality? I read a LinkedIn post the other day, which I thought was quite interesting. There's a difference between AI slop and AI content, right? You can create content with AI that's good quality. But I mean, this is my question. Can you? And if you can, how do you do it? And would you say, yes, let's create, if you were able to maybe not guarantee, but if you were able to say, yes, I can use AI in a way that generates quality, would you then create a lot more? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I agree with that. So we actually just released a research report on our website this morning. that we
Okay, great.
interviewed. We interviewed 150 executives and over 2,000 consumers on their spending behavior and consumer habits around debit. And we put that together. This is our own research report because we do know that that influences LLMs quite a bit in terms of statistics and what are we providing. And people come to us as guides. They want to understand what's happening in industry, like what do we need to be looking out for in the short term. But we're able to do that type of research and publish a lot of great content on top of like our cadence with producing high quality blog posts that are maybe on a specific topic that are more bottom of the funnel. In addition to some of the other things where I feel like just a few years ago it wouldn't be possible for us to really pump out a lot of this really good high quality data. We're not just doing it for the sake of how much can we produce, but like we're making sure that it solves real problems, that it's unique to us. Not anyone could have just created it. We just replicate that process. And to your point about having an expert involved in each of the assets that we produce, so each piece of content that we produce will actually byline it by someone within the company, so there's more ownership, more oversight, and making sure that it's actually useful for who they talk to on a daily basis. And so I just think AI helps us do more.
Yeah. And are you going to do that report like once a year, or would you, now that because you were able to do that, would you do more of them? Like how do you think that impacts that?
Potentially, this one we've done for a couple of years now, which we'll continue to do. But I think it could open up more opportunities for other reports that we might want to run.
Yeah, makes sense. How about you, Will? What are your thoughts on where to use AI and in a way that still maintains that quality? Because that's still really the most important.
For sure, yeah. And I guess for context, so I work at Multiverse. We are an edtech unicorn, double unicorn as of last week in the UK. So we train across the UK and Germany. We train workers on using AI and upskilling workforces in AI across the public sector and the private sector. So we say to clients, and clients say to us once they've seen impact on programs, AI won't take your job, but someone that knows how to use AI will take your job. And I think that applies to content as well. You're always going to need content marketers. You're always going to need human expertise. That's what brings the originality and the unique nature of content. But ultimately, as Scott said, if you're creating a lot less than everyone else because you're not using tools that can enable you to get there quicker, you're not competitive. I think a lot of it is also, if people just kind of get a generic gem or a chat GPT and go, well, I tried to put this blog in, or I tried to prompt it to create an article outline for me, and it didn't really do anything. You think, okay, you've got to use AI as a part of your infrastructure, right? How are you training it? What are you training the model on? Have you trained it on previous content that you liked? Have you given it examples of content that you think is good? Have you given it good source material to work with? Have you given it parameters or in which to think about what you're creating and not creating? Have you shared examples of top performing copy and content? It needs some work and some thought and some training and some enablement and some coaching on how are you using it, what are you using? Are you using the right tool? Tools like Notebook LLM are fantastic for summarizing content papers. Claude is an absolutely fantastic goldmine for your tone and guidance, and just as a true co-pilot, right? But I think it's about the tools can help, but sort of AI as a whole, I think, risks people just expecting they can rock up and just chuck a few things into a gem and create something. I think it's how you use the tools and really understanding where they fit in your workflows, which is what we train the people that go on our programs on, is how do these tools fit in your workflows? What are you doing at each stage? Are you using them in the right ways? Where's the human in the loop? It just requires you to be a bit less lazy as a person, basically, and think about them a bit more intentionally.
Yeah. I have a good question on that, but I wanted to say to everyone watching, feel free to put questions in the chat and we will address them throughout, because I think there's some really interesting. Okay, Elliot has a question. I'm going to go to Elliot's question in a second, but I wanted to ask actually, because this is a dilemma that I have. LinkedIn, would you use AI to create LinkedIn posts? And imagine, and when I say LinkedIn, I don't mean go to ChatGPT and say, write me a LinkedIn post. Say you've got like proper, you've trained your Claude, you've got a skill that knows your voice, you've put effort into it, and you've trained the LLM and everything. Would you still, like a tool, a platform where authenticity is the whole thing, right? Would you use AI to create your LinkedIn posts? What do you think? I don't know, Will, if you have thoughts on that.
I wouldn't. I mean, I think I'm so burnt out, as I'm sure everyone here is, on LinkedIn posts where these horror story marketing posts where it's like, my 5th failed interview this week, or 10% of CMOs learn this lesson. There's so many of those posts now that I think we're all just so jaded to it. And I think I would write a post and say, is this concise? Is this, how does this compare to previous posts I've written? Could I say this a different way? But with something as short and concise as that, when it's your personal brand, I think, you create another version of it. Like we used Octopost at ComplyAdvantage. So some social scheduling tools like that enable, AEs to recreate their own versions of a core piece of content that you're assigning to reps is a great way of doing it. But not for true thought leadership.
Okay, interesting. What do you think about this, Laura? Like, how do you use AI at 11FS as part of your processes? Do you use it to create content?
Yeah, we do. I think it's sort of important to bear in mind what Scott and Will have said, that like AI is a tool, and so it shouldn't be doing the end to end for you. It's about how you use the tool to your best advantage. So, it's obviously a fantastic tool. Like, use it as a research tool, use it as a prompt, use it as a creative, kind of brainstorming device. Use it to write things if you want to. But I maintain that the human should be the last sort of bastion. So the kind of the QA, the QC, like, does this actually sound like my brand? Like, does it sound like a human? And sometimes we are like writing in the voice of, the host on a podcast. Does this sound like David Britt? Does this sound like Kate Moody? Whatever. Like, and the best people to tell that are people. And I think to Will's point, everyone is so jaded now by all these, a kind of like dross that you see on social media, that I think we're so that as the AI gets better, so does our ability to spot it. And so, if you've built a brand on authenticity, if your audience is then going, but an AI just wrote that, you immediately lose your credibility. So I think you can use the AI as much as you want to help you, but I don't think it can, take you all the way there without any kind of human in the process to do any checks and balances.
I would also add as well, we tend to look at AI to just replace what we've been doing, whereas actually I think it's also about thinking about what could AI enable us to do that we couldn't do before. Like, for example, great data sets at Multiverse on what are things that are learner pain points on programs, how do those map to projects they're building on, Comply. We had huge amounts of data as well on what are kind of some of the rules people were building to monitor transactions. Data was probably very unstructured and stuff we couldn't really have put into thought leadership cleanly and quickly before. Obviously, data, AI platforms offer great abilities to help clean that data for us to analyze trends in it and unlock things we weren't doing before. So I think the other question is also not just replacing what you're doing, but what does it enable you to do around things like data analysis, data visualization, scope and scale of research, translating content, all these different things that AI could do that maybe enables you to do something different, not just do what you were doing before.
Yeah, I just feel like there's so much pressure on LinkedIn and online you need to be maximizing output, put AI into everything. And I think I went to a seminar thing, workshop on Tuesday, and this lady was really pushing like, oh, every Sunday the AI interviews her and puts together her schedule for her. And I was just like, I agree with all of you that you have to put it in a lot of it can allow you to do things you couldn't do before. I think it's also okay if you purposefully say, no, this person should do this, person is better. And LinkedIn has been my kind of like, I'm not sure. And it was interesting because this lady was like, oh, AI does all my LinkedIn. So then I went to her LinkedIn and it was just quite obvious. And I think you can get your LinkedIn, I've gotten it to a point where it's really good. The LinkedIn posts are quite good that it generates, but I still just feel like people can tell. And especially we're a writing company, and it's like, this is just, I think what you said, Laura, about who are you as a company as well, if transparency is one of your values, if you're authentic, then what message does that send if your LinkedIn posts are then all AI generated? So it's an interesting kind of debate and dilemma. Elliot here has a question. Have you ever tried using AI for a specific piece of content and it didn't work out? Where do you find it most effective specifically in the process? So I guess, I guess your big report, Scott, you said it worked very well. But have there been any instances where it just failed? It didn't work well. I don't know if anyone else as well. Any examples of that?
Yeah, probably more times than it's worked well, it's failed.
Oh, really?
Over the few years, but I would say it's getting better every day. Right now, it's the dumbest it will be. But I'll give two specific pieces where it did has recently worked really well for us. It was, Claude was mentioned, and I've been, trying to push my team to use Claude a little bit more in terms of the process. So one of the things I've always struggled with as a content creator is like, how can we create visuals and like flow charts within the content that really brings the idea to life in a visual way? Because we all know that people scan. Nobody really reads the whole article. And so if people will stop and view information if it captures their attention. So my designers are not subject matter experts. So we'll actually say, take this entire piece of content, ask Claude what flowcharts we can build based on the content, and then go design that and make it branded to Galileo. And then we'll embed those within the article. And I've just been really happy to see, some of if you look at our recent articles, they have like 3 or 4 flowcharts and graphics that really bring the idea to life that Claude has helped us with. The other thing that we did with the research report is we've normally always done a PDF version like you did with your report on top fintech marketers. And the PDF version has always been our main asset, but we actually took that asset, used Claude Code to build out an entire separate asset for it that's interactive. It is responsive, so it works for mobile and desktop. And it's basically like a indexable version of the ebook that people can get to via a link that we just couldn't do before if it wasn't for Claude helping us build that out. So those are just 2 examples of areas recently that it's worked quite well.
I might message you separately about the second one because I was thinking of doing the same thing for our report. So very cool that you're able to do that with Claude Code. I was going to ask you about Claude Design as well. Have you been, because it sounds like you're using Claude Code mainly for this rather than Claude Design?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Claude Design yet, to be honest.
Okay, so Claude Code for the flowcharts. That's good to know. Laura or Will, any thoughts on like where you've seen maybe it doesn't work well?
I think for us on the podcast, we do a weekly news show, and I think obviously it's getting better now. But in recent times, the weakest point in AI was knowing things that had just happened. As in, so if you were researching, the most up to date stories in fintech, it would throw up things from ages ago or things that were completely not relevant and that kind of thing. So I think it's getting a lot better. But current affairs, not good at all. So we'd have to use it as a tool to research around the topic rather than the actual headlines itself. I think as Scott said, sort of every day it gets better than the day before, but that was definitely a failing in the early days to sort of help us shape a conversation about something that it didn't even realize had happened, because it is sort of behind the times on what it's learning from in terms of news and up-to-date announcements.
Yeah, makes sense. Will, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think at Comply, one of the things we would struggle with the LLMs is sort of reading regulation and understanding the detail of regulation. It can hallucinate. It can't necessarily read a 60-page EU draft of, AML regulations and summarize that. I think, again, a better way of using it there is you do, get an SME to send you a 20-minute explainer on a voice note, put it into an LLM and get it to summarize what the person said. But I think that's quite dangerous, that hallucination around quite technical and regulatory content. You've got to be very careful with. I think the other one that is a bit of an opportunity and a challenge is tools like Grammarly, which are great at kind of doing your spell checking and qualifying. But also I do find with Google and Grammarly and some of these tools, if you sort of accept all their wording recommendations, they make it so concise that it's quite rude. And you sort of take your tone and style out of the content. They just said, "Oh, that word's not necessary. You can reframe that like that." And actually, it gets quite. Maybe it's just because I'm millennial, and I think millennials are a bit more, emojis, and they try to soften the language a little bit more. But I think they can get quite rude in terms of if you just took they try and over-index, I think, for being concise versus how do you sound like a human and the natural ebb and flow of language. And I think I'm not sure the AI systems that I've seen are quite there yet in terms of doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think especially in RegTech, it's interesting because when you're targeting compliance managers, they do use ChatGPT and everything, but at the same time, they're also very skeptical. So if they then turn to your content to get the real info, but then your content is also AI, you have to make sure that you're actually coming from an expert, because if not, that will definitely lose a lot of trust there. Martha has a really interesting question, which is kind of related to the AI topic, or I will input an AI angle to this, which is kind of early fintechs in terms of content, where to start. And I think where I'm going to add the AI angle is, imagine if you're just getting started, early stage fintech, what kind of formats would you do nowadays? And how would you use AI to create that content? I think it's an interesting kind of strategy question in terms of what would you prioritize. Is there anyone who wants to take that? Like, how would you start early stage fintech?
Yeah, I can jump in and share a few thoughts. I mean, if you're just getting started on this, I feel like you might have a slight advantage as those that have been in this for a long time, because I think we kind of get stuck in our ways, whereas I'm having to rethink the whole process.
Yeah.
And so one of the things for an early stage, like startup doing content, this year in 2026, we've been shifting how we do things. I'll mention a tool that we use that's been really helpful called Athena HQ. I think it's like Google Search Console, but for LLMs. I think there's a lot of tools out there right now. But this one where we'll take a piece of content and we'll say, what are the top 3 prompts I should be targeting? And then we can actually use this database to find where there's search volume with those prompts. And then we can actually stack ourselves against our competitors, and we can see where there's gaps. Like, is one of our competitors, getting mentioned 50% of the time and we're 0%? Well, how can we get up to that level of where our competitors are? Our content writers will obviously do their thing and really write a good article, but then we'll take that written piece after it's drafted and we'll put it in back to this tool to say, how are we optimizing this for these? Are we doing it well? Are we answering these questions? And it'll usually give us quite a bit of suggestions as well. So it's like a 3-part process now that we're really thinking about it in terms of LLMs first and not necessarily traditional SEO, on how we can make it really useful for humans.
Anyone else have any thoughts on getting started now? How would you do things?
I think, for Martha's question, I think for me, the big question is, and I know it sounds obvious, but I don't think content leaders ask this enough, is what are the business challenges that marketing is trying to address? And content is content answer, and then what content? I think it was interesting in your poll at the start, I think it was 46% of people said proving commercial impact was their big challenge. And we had some great numbers at Comply in terms of measuring pipeline, proving impact. Those were not the things that built credibility. They were proof points that came from being credible. The credibility came from the CEO going to a meeting with a consultancy and the consultancy saying, your content is even better than what we're putting out. How are you creating stuff like that? It came from customers loving the content. It came from all the qualitative stuff that just came from writing good content that was actually differentiating us in the market. And the goal there was to differentiate us in the market and show that we were, as our whole sort of experience was designed to be about, putting the customer first, a great customer experience, knowledgeable customer success managers, subject matter experts. That was the whole value driver for ComplyAdvantage. So having content that supported that was laddered up into a business goal. So I think the big question is, what is the business goal you're trying to achieve? And then you build a content plan that speaks to a business goal. And I think that is sometimes where people get lost with the commercial impact, is they drive right into marketing strategies or into tactics, or okay, we've got to get our domain authority up, or we've got to get some white papers created, or we've got to do a webinar. But it's like, what are you trying to achieve as a business? Is it your brand awareness? Are you trying to do some early pipeline generation? Are you trying to enable sales? Like what's market segment of the market you're selling to? What's your competitive landscape? All these different things. I think those are the big business questions. And then what's the role of content in answering that? I think is probably the thing there.
Yeah. And I think also
I agree with that more either. I think just what are you doing it for is the biggest question you can answer, of like, what are your goals, and is content the answer? Because sometimes it might not be, but if it is, like, figure out why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. And then in the question on format, like, who are those people? What do they like to consume? Are they super time poor decision makers, in which case don't hit them with like an enormous PDF of hundreds of slides. You'd be better off doing something short form. Or are they what's the word, like a sort of champion of the brand, who's then going to elevate that up to a decision maker, in which case you can give them more detail that maybe they are the audience for like the deeper PDF, that kind of thing. So I think figuring out why you want content, who you want content for, and also what you want them to do with it as well. So like, is the aim, just thought leadership to go, right, these guys know their stuff. When we have need of them, we'll come back to them. Maybe. Or is it like, actually, I'm trying to sell you something right now, and, creating demand and that sort of thing. I think it's sort of figure out who you are and who you're talking to and what you want them to do about it. And then equally, I think, it's just, when you're first starting out, like that's just a really exciting time to experiment as well. If you haven't done any content, like you can't be wrong. Like start, measure it. If it didn't work, try something else. Like I think there's a sort of freedom in being not afraid to fail when you first start out as well. So like just because you start one content format doesn't mean you have to do that content format for life. Like you can absolutely experiment and learn and optimize from the results you get as well.
Yeah, I want to get to LLM visibility in a second because Denisa also has a good question on this. But I just on that topic of tracking commercial impact, talking to leadership, I'd love to hear from all of you, like maybe a story or an example where you were able to get the respect of content from leadership, or maybe the acknowledgement or the understanding. And I know, Will, like in our interview for Comply, you really explained how by telling a story with Dream Data, those Slack notifications, all that really helped paint a picture. And then, there was no longer questions about content. But I was wondering if anyone else has any examples like that, that you were able to use to get leadership to understand content. Does anyone have any?
I mean, I think at 11FS, we've always been incredibly fortunate that we are a content marketing led organization from its inception. So we haven't ever had to prove ourselves to leadership because leadership set us up in this way. I owe an awful amount to David Breer for his championing of content as a way to get 11FS's name out there from the very beginning. That being said, you've still got to keep proving him right. So, every time you can say that a deal has been won through to origination at an event or through somebody being on a podcast that then started a conversation, there's always that, kind of little adrenaline spike from that, that also proves like to the rest of the business and, importantly, finance, that it is worth us doing these events, that it is worth us, putting out the initial spend up front for the revenue generated down the line as well. But yeah, I just consider myself very lucky to work for an organization that's always had content at the forefront.
Yeah, I know. It does depend a lot on the leaders. Unfortunately, I've just met so many marketing leaders, and I'm sure we all have, who are like, they don't believe in it. They don't trust us. We need to show it. So I just know fortunately, it's not very common, but it is great when that does happen. Scott, do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, we actually just completed our Q1 top of funnel report in terms of how we're driving leads. And we've got a very, robust lead process where we have, marketing qualified leads like 0 all the way through 3 that kind of tell us where people are within the buyer's journey. And we looked at the MQLs that were driven in Q1 from the website specifically that are connected to content. And it was actually up 51% year over year from Q1 of last year. And the website for us drives a large volume of those leads as well. And so I think it's an ongoing conversation we have with leadership where that's kind of the main number we're looking at is like, how many leads are we getting from the website specifically? How many of those leads are touching, the content that we're creating? And, are we're actually seeing less traffic, but more events on our website. And so it's good to see that like we can look at high level, our content is working because we can see the MQL2s is what we call them that are becoming known to us through our content. And so that's a number we track pretty aggressively that our leadership is like, keep doing it, keep going.
That's great. Yeah. And one thing I want to highlight is Galileo is also your core banking technology. Like this is very B2B, B2 enterprise almost. Your sales cycles are super long because I sometimes get pushback and people are like, oh, we're too B2B. Like no one's researching us online and submitting lead forms. And I'm like, definitely does happen. And you're a very good example, Galileo, 25 years in business. Like you can't get more enterprise and core banking technology.
Right.
And yet you're getting tons of website leads. So this is really, really great to hear. And I love that you're able to connect that to content as well. Maybe we should do an update to the case study and go even deeper. How about you, Will? Do you have any maybe stories with multiverse or something like that?
I think I mentioned it. One of the standout moments was our CEO came back. It was a Christmas party, and he was just so excited that he'd been at this big financial crime consultancy, and the CEO of the consultancy said, "Your content's better than ours," and he was just
That's crazy.
thrilled with it. Like it just,
I
and
love
it's
it.
really silly because you spend years and years building a program, proving the value, getting all of the numbers Scott and everyone's mentioned, which is your right to exist, right? You've got to prove the revenue impact. That is your right to exist. That's the foundation. But that's not the thing that's going to get them on a stage going, "We love what you're doing. This is amazing." That's the feedback from customers, from people outside, from people in the business that they respect, and that is hard to control. But it's about doing good things, doing it consistently. I think, that's what gets you into from the great, okay, you're proving your value to we love this, we've got to do more of this. And I do think, look, you can't do that with any organization, right? You do have to qualify if you're looking for a job, you're looking for a role in an organization, what their attitudes to content and to marketing are. What is their approach? What is their philosophy? Are they open-minded? Are they willing? Are they people you could coach or engage? Because not every company is like that. And I think if they're not, it's a bit of a red flag to the kind of marketing organization you're going to be walking into, right? That it's going to be a lead machine, and it's probably not going to be a very good lead machine because there's not much depth of thought behind it. So
it's a qualitative that really makes an impact. And I would always say, like, keep track of that. Sometimes in form submissions, I've seen it, for like a lead form submission, be like, oh, this is a really great piece of content. Keep track of that, because then you can use that to show to leadership and all of that. So we've only got a few minutes left, but there's 2 questions on the same topic. So I'm going to cover those, which is LLM visibility. So I know, Scott, you've been doing quite a bit into this. I'd be keen to hear from others as well. So one question is, how important are specific types of content for LLM visibility? So like videos, reports, we've kind of talked about how interactive reports are good, but also, how do you track LLM queries and how AI tools perceive your brand? So I guess I'd love to hear from all of you, like LLM visibility, what are you doing there? What are you tracking? And is this like a key channel that you're actually focusing on? I don't know, whoever wants to jump in for that.
I think I would say on LLMs, I think I wouldn't be creating content that I wouldn't be creating for other purposes, and I wouldn't be investing in channels that aren't also useful for other channels. I think similar to SEO, we can kind of over-index, and if you're creating things just for LLMs, it's not going to be valuable, useful content, and that should still be the core of what you're doing, right? Is build it into a content strategy, do things that are going to be genuinely useful for your customers and for you. And I do think, think about what people use LLMs for, right? Maybe Claude will change that a little bit, but I do think people often use them to summarize things or to get a quick view of something, and then they will either go away and Google it or go on your website and do their own more detailed research. So I think it's also about, I know G2 in the fintech space is very popular. I know Reddit, those channels, G2 and Reddit are 2 I know that come up a lot in that space. Being in edtech, there's less channels that are kind of relevant for us. So we're thinking that through for Multiverse. I think for us as a business, we're quite high profile. We get a lot of media coverage in the UK, and that is part of how we're thinking about LLMs. For us, is probably a bit less in the fintech sense of, how do we get review sites and things like that and ranking. We're thinking more about, we get a lot of news coverage, some of it good, some of it more challenging. How do we think about how we appear in LLMs when people are searching for us, to make sure they get a kind of balanced and thoughtful view about what we do, and our point of view is in there. And that's probably more about some of the keywords and domain authority and, our CEO's view and thought leadership and external thought leadership and PR, right? I think is a really interesting channel in terms of getting high quality PR and third party coverage. It comes back to business goals, but I think it's important people don't over index on it and start creating loads of stuff that isn't actually part of their general strategy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
The way we're thinking about it is like B to A to B. So instead of just straight business to business, we do know at the end of the day, people are the ones making decisions to go with us. But if we want to get added to a short list, if we want LLMs and AI to serve us up as a source or information that's helpful, we've got to find ways to be included in LLMs on those lists, because people aren't going out and doing as much research as they used to. They're just saying, oh, let's take the top few resources that, ChatGPT is recommending to me. So I think at the end of the day, you have to think about this. Is this helpful for a human to consume? Yep. But how do we get it in front of them?
Yeah, that's a whole other topic for another day. How do you market to LLMs? But anyway, really, really interesting. How about you, Laura? How you think about LLM visibility?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything dramatic to add that Will and Scott haven't already said. I think, yeah, completely it sits within wider content strategy. It sort of goes back to sort of don't create content for the sake of content, like create content for a purpose. It's definitely something that we haven't done enough of, and is actually a point of focus for us in the second half of this year. But I think that comes with a wider kind of umbrella of like looking at your website, looking at conversion rate optimization, looking at how your website performs when nobody's on it, as in how much do you rank in kind of the Gemini summary or whatever it may be. And if it's pulling in the wrong things, how do you tidy up your website so that it's not pulling something that's in an archived page from ages ago and actually relevant information. And I think that's the future, right? I went to an event where one of the stats was like something like 54% of decisions are made about your website without ever visiting it, because people have like just got the answers that they want from either a Google search or a Gemini summary, and then either you've answered their question, in which case great, or maybe you haven't because you haven't ranked, but they've got the answer to their question and it might not be what you want it to be. So a lot of it is about thinking, how does your audience access your brand, access your website without ever touching it, so how are you influencing them to then move across and actually engage with your brand directly? And that's definitely going to be a big area of focus for us going forward.
Yeah, very exciting. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me. This was a really great panel. I'm going to send the recording to everyone afterwards, key takeaways. I'll also share all of your LinkedIns, if that's okay, if people want to follow you and ask you any questions, as well as your companies, of course. But yeah, thanks everyone who was watching, for joining, for your questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but hopefully, if not, just send them to me and I'll try and answer as best as I can. And stay tuned for future webinars in the future as well. Amazing. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.